Since at least 2008, the National Security Agency has been using secret technology to hack into and take control of computers not connected to the internet. These revelations come from the trove of documents leaked by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden. Late today, the NSA said in a statement, continuous and selective publication of specific techniques and tools used by the NSA to pursue legitimate foreign intelligence targets is detrimental to the security of the United States and our allies. Joining me now to discuss what they're talking about is David Sanger of the New York Times and Cedric Leighton, a former Air Force intelligence officer who served as Deputy Training Director for the NSA in 2009 and 2010. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. David, tell us about this technology that the NSA was pushing back against in that statement.
Sure, Gwen. The technology solves a big problem that the NSA has long had. Most of its taps into computers, most of its cyber activity is through those big optical telephone cables that run across the Atlantic and Pacific, or through regional networks. But what do you do with a computer that's separated from all networks, that an intelligence agency or some other agency of a government or a company might separate out to keep all the data secret? And that's a problem that the NSA has had for years. And they had it in particular with the Iranian computers that were running their nuclear enrichment program. And so this technology puts a small radio transmitter into, say, a thumb drive or sometimes even into a circuit board in the computer that can broadcast back to a facility called a nightstand. It's basically the size of a briefcase that would pick up the data and also allow the NSA to insert malware, as they did in the Iranian case.
Physically insert, presumably in the production process or at some point like that?
In the production process, or maybe in the shipping process, or, you know, a scientist is at a trade show or a scientific conference and gets a thumb drive, or there's a maintenance person who comes in. And in the course of my reporting on Olympic Games, the program against Iran, it was clear that some device like this had been used back and forth. We withheld a few of the details at that time at the government's request, but then the Snowden papers came out and Der Spiegel published some of the details of this several weeks ago.
In fact, Der Spiegel published an actual catalog of these kinds of devices. So tell me, Colonel Leighton, how is this used? Is this just simple surveillance, just knowing for the sake of knowing?
For the most part, it is simple surveillance, but it can also be used as a means, as a precursor really to an attack. So for example, if the United States decides to go into what is known as computer network attack, then they could use the information that is gleaned through technologies like this to serve as the pathway in order to conduct an attack of that type. So that's what they're doing. They're looking at, they're reconnoitering the network, they're doing a reconnaissance mission, and then if they need to attack for whatever policy reason, then they can do so based on the information that they gain from techniques like this.
Are techniques like this only limited to potential warfare, or are they limited to keeping an eye on foreign governments, or is it also applicable domestically?
It is, technically it would be applicable domestically, but policy-wise and from a legal standpoint, it is not used domestically. These techniques are only used for foreign intelligence purposes now, at least by the NSA. Now, when it comes to the target set itself, that is based on intelligence priorities, and those intelligence priorities are decided not only by the Director of National Intelligence, but also in the White House by the President.
Now, the intelligence priorities we're talking about in this case, China,
right,
Russia.
Right. So anything that would deal with terrorism would be an early example. And we published a map, or we've seen a map, and I think you'll see it up on the internet as well, that shows where a number of these computer network exploitation sites are. Many of them are in the Middle East, as you would expect. But China's a big target, and particularly the Chinese PLA units that are responsible or believed to be responsible for cyber attacks on the U.S. Because this would enable the U.S. to sit on those networks, see an attack massing, and then maybe make a decision about whether they wanted to take a preemptive strike against them. Now, we don't have any evidence they've ever done that. The only case where we've really had solid evidence of a major U.S. attack using these kind of techniques is Iran.
100,000 computers is the latest kind of guesstimate,
number.
Round number. Do we have reason to believe, given that the information we have is some years old, that it's much more than that by now?
Well, I think one can extrapolate and say that it probably is more than that. I'm not sure what the order of magnitude would be, but it's a natural technical progression that the numbers that you're going after in a case like this would increase just because the proliferation of technology is such and the potential adversaries are much more adept at using technology. So it's just natural that we would be interested in finding out what they're doing, how they're doing it, and through what devices they're using.
How different is this than the kind of action, behavior, surveillance that we accuse other governments of doing to us, and we say that's a bad thing? How is it different the way we're doing it?
It's a fascinating question, Gwen, and this went to one of the NSA's statements to us as we were preparing the story. They wouldn't talk about the technology itself, but they did say that they thought this was quite different from the kind of activities that a country like China participates in. They have said that China comes in and steals intellectual property from American companies. Certainly all the evidence seems to suggest that's the case. The U.S. says if it conducts this kind of activity, it's only in its national security interests. Now, the problem with this argument is that if you ask the Chinese, the search for economic secrets, for manufacturing secrets, for any of the things they're looking for from, say, Boeing or Lockheed or an American electronics company is, in their mind, part of their national security. And it's one of the reasons that there's been sort of this dialogue.
Definition.
Yeah, and so there's, President Obama says, no, we don't engage in this kind of thing. And the Chinese say, well, you're engaging in something that uses very similar techniques.
Colonel Leighton, in your experience, how do you balance this out, the dangerous potential and the lines we walk up to diplomatically versus the usefulness of a tool like this?
Well, Gwen, that's really the $64,000 question when it comes to this. So from a military standpoint, and we all have to keep in mind that NSA is technically a combat support agency in the Department of Defense. So that means that their primary mission should always be to support military forces. So from an intelligence and military support perspective, it becomes very important to prosecute war efforts, especially in this day and age when cyber war is not just a theory, it's actually a reality out there. And because cyber war is a reality, you have to have the techniques and procedures that allow you to engage in at least the defensive aspects of cyber warfare, but also you need to be able to switch to offense in order to have a credible deterrent. And that is something that the United States has to wrestle with very, very carefully, because we're not only plowing new ground, but we're also going into a situation where the legal constraints have not kept pace with the technology as it currently exists today.
Definitely peeling back the skin on an onion. Colonel Cedric Leighton, David Sanger, National Security Correspondent for the New York Times. Thank you both very much.
My pleasure, Gwen. Thank you.